Good afternoon and welcome to the Greater Cincinnati Safety Council's monthly virtual meeting. The goal of today's meeting is to introduce our members and guests to solutions and information to enhance and maybe even start the safety culture at your organizations. We will receive important updates from the Ohio BWC, Greg Harmon, and our keynote speaker, Barry Spurlock. My name is Andrea Saunders, and I'm the Corporate and Community Events Manager at the Cincinnati USA Regional Chamber. Thank you for joining us today. You have joined this virtual meeting in listen-only mode with your microphones muted. Questions for our speaker can be submitted in writing through Zoom's Q&A window. Please make sure you are sharing thoughts and feedback during our discussion for all of our speakers. We'll cover as many questions as we can within our time frame. And if you've joined us by phone or need to sign off sooner, you can view the full webinar posted at www.cincinnatiChamber.com/membership/cost-savings-programs/safety council within the next 2 business days. With that being said, I do want to put in a quick little note here. I know some of us like to sign off right before we do our announcements at the end, but I promise we have a super exciting and very, very important announcement that you'll want to stick around for at the end of today's meeting. So with that being said, here's a quick look at our meeting agenda. Please make sure you have a pen and paper to capture all the important info to be shared. Now I'd like to start the meeting off with updates from our members. If you would like to share an update, event, or good news happening at your business or in our community, please put your name in the chat and I will unmute you so that you can share with the group. While I wait for you guys to maybe enter that in the chat, just a quick reminder, you can find the calendar of meetings and topics on our website, plus recordings of all of our meetings thus far since we've done in this year, and you can bookmark that page and check back for updates. Our website will be our primary way of keeping everyone informed, but we will still send out monthly meeting reminders and updates from the BWC. So it doesn't look like today we have any announcements from our members. So I'm going to go ahead, and next I would like to introduce Greg Harmon, a member of our steering committee, to provide our Ohio Bureau of Workers' Comp updates. Hi, Greg.
Well, thanks, Andrea. Thanks for joining us, guys. Really, hopefully you're going to get a lot out of this presentation today. So let me go ahead and hit our updates before I introduce our main speaker. So this is our January updates. We've got a couple webinars, coming up every single month. We were doing these every single week, but between juggling, I think a lot of different projects, and then also potentially maybe even some webinar burnout. I think we've all been, having our share of webinars and online courses. We're kind of backing these off, and we're going to do one a month for the foreseeable future. You can see we had a webinar on January 7th, and it's, are you a perfectionist? So the PERRP, PERP, that's for our public employers. So while that was last week, the way I do every single month is you can hop online and still view this webinar. So even if you've missed it, go to our BWC Learning Center website, and you'll be able to view that if you would choose to do so. So if you're a public employer, it's going to cover a lot of tidbits for you, things that PERP might look for, whether it's on an inspection, documentation that you may need. On the 17th of February, that's going to be our next webinar, and that's office ergonomic tips for teleworkers, which a lot of us are doing that these days. So that might be a beneficial webinar to hop in on. Again, these are only about an hour length, so it's not too bad to sit through 1 hour. We have some classes coming up. There's an accident analysis class. I'm actually going to co-teach that next week with Tammy Nye. Tammy Nye is a consultant like myself out of the Toledo area. So this is one thing that's kind of nice about all the virtual platforms now, is I'm going to actually co-instruct with a consultant from the northern part of Ohio who I would not normally teach with in our normal classroom setting. So that's going to be, again, a virtual class from 9:30 to 1. We're going to try to make it as interactive as possible. If you need any credits for any of your programs, that might be one you might want to hop on. We've got pretty good enrollment right now. I think there's about 45 attendees or students currently enrolled in that class. And then on January 27th, there's going to be another course that we have. It's a virtual class called Violence in the Workplace. And again, for those, you're going to want to attend by registering in the BWC Learning Center. Moving on to our Ohio Safety Congress and Expo. I've been kind of promoting this every month because we've had a lot more time to prepare this year. Everything's going to be online. Registration is open right now, and that's going to be held on March 10th and 11th online. There's going to be a lot of educational opportunities for you. So I'm hoping you're able to attend. You don't have to drive a couple hours to Columbus and worry about any type of parking or anything like that. But we had to kind of do it on the fly last year, but we had a whole year of prep this year. So I think we did a good job last year, but it's going to be even better this year. And hopefully next year we'll be in person, but who knows? So the BWC is currently, we're still working on our program. We've got you covered. So the BWC is currently distributing 23 million face masks to Ohio employers. The initiative is expected to continue through June, and the first round of 23 million masks ran last year from May through October. We're still in that second phase of handing out masks for Ohio employers. NIOSH has updated several items on their website. COVID-19, they have updated information on slowing down the spread, how to protect yourself, and what to do if you are sick. It's also got a comprehensive guide to mask, what to choose, how to wear it, take it off and clean it. And then finally, it's got some information regarding vaccines, which I know that's kind of an important topic and a hot topic for everybody about the different types of vaccines that are going to be distributed. And OSHA's updated several items on their website. Number one, carbon monoxide safety in relation to portable generators. That becomes a hot topic this time of year just because a lot of people working outside potentially. Snow removal from elevated surfaces. We've got a lot of winter left, so if you're potentially working outside and you have to worry about snow or ice on an elevated work surface, this might be an area where you could benefit from. And then also, again, with the winter season coming up, they've got a guide on working safely in cold weather. But what's nice about this is they're giving you two guides, one in English and one in Spanish as well. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker for today. I'm excited to introduce a fellow NKU alumni. Barry and I both graduated from NKU's Chase College of Law. Barry was a couple years ahead of me, so I really did not know him very well when I was in school. I think if we had started at the same time, we probably would have chosen some of the same electives through the years. But the first time I saw Barry was actually I had to go in on a Saturday. Nobody wanted to go in on a Saturday. For whatever reason, they made us go in, and we had to listen to two people argue in front of a panel of judges. Barry happened to be one of those participants. And I can tell you this, it wasn't like they just picked people out at random or anybody could apply. You only pick the brightest and best people to argue in front of the entire college and a panel of judges. So I remember I was very impressed with Barry and just watching him speak and his presentation skills. I think after that, we passed each other in the hallway a handful of times, and I tried to stop and say hello. But again, he was a couple years ahead of me. But I think had we been started the same year, we probably would have been in very similar classes. Barry's kind of a unique attorney. And the reason I would say that, and I think I can speak well to this, is I took every single employment and labor law class that was offered at Chase College of Law in Northern Kentucky University. And I had a decent safety background, more as a technician. I was moving into training. But I'd say in the 5 years that it took me to get through law school, I spent at the max 2 weeks on OSHA, at the very most. What makes Barry unique is he had a very strong environmental health and safety background prior to ever even starting law school. So you may run into many attorneys who can help you out with OSHA litigation. That may be advertised. A lot of times I think what happens is attorneys will specialize in employment and labor law. And because OSHA has something to do with employees, it kind of gets shoved into that niche of employment and labor law. It's different. And I think Barry's going to offer a strong safety background that you're not going to get from too many attorneys, even if they say they practice OSHA litigation. So that's, in my mind, what makes Barry somewhat unique. You're not going to find very many attorneys that have the experience that he has in health and safety. So Barry is a certified safety professional. That's really about the highest designation you can get in the safety field. And it's kind of like the gold standard. I just recently received my CSP. He is a professor at Eastern Kentucky University. He teaches a variety of environmental health and safety courses. He's also a practicing attorney with Crump Spurlock. But prior to law school, he had 16 years of environmental health and safety experience in the steel, food, and insurance industries. So he is a frequent speaker at the ASSP and National Safety Congress conventions. He's also authored numerous scholarly articles, and he's co-authored the book Chomp Chomp. It's the Small Business Guide to Lower Workers' Compensation Premiums. So I'm going to hand it off to Barry, but I know he's going to try to reserve a little bit of time for Q&A at the end. I would encourage you to take advantage of that, because if you don't ask him right now and you ask him another time, it's going to cost you. So take advantage of it now while it's free. Okay. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to you, Barry. Thanks for helping us out today and joining.
Well, Greg, thank you. That may be one of the most generous introductions I've ever had. My respect to you is completely mutual. I got to meet Greg in law school, like he said, and then we've got to stay in contact afterwards. And it's been a pleasure. Just think the world of him and think the world of the opportunity here to speak to everybody today. So with that introduction, Greg, you set the bar high. I hope I don't disappoint anybody in here today. But as Greg said, I'm going to leave some time at the end for Q&A. And a lot of times I do this presentation or one similar to it. Some of the ASSP events, we many times get questions during the process. And I say we, myself and a former colleague, Todd Logsdon, and I do this a lot together. And we get a lot of questions during it, and we find ourselves repeating, just hang on, it's coming. Now, there's a chance I may not get to your answer. And if that's the case, we're going to do that at the end. During the presentation, I'm going to present some hypothetical scenarios. I found that that's a great way to teach. I think that's how Harvard Business School does a lot of their stuff, is through case studies. So these are kind of mini case studies. And I may ask for some feedback. Many times I deliver presentations in person. Now I've got a whole lot better, probably like many of you have, in doing these things in a virtual format. I like to move around, engage the audience. So I still want to try to engage you a little bit, because I might ask for some feedback on some thoughts on some of these hypotheticals. Share those in real time. And if you don't mind, just kind of do that through the chat, and I'll kind of navigate back and forth between the chat. But as far as questions, if we could hold those to the end, I'm going to try to get through this in enough time. I kind of feel like Jerry Reed and Smokey and the Bandit a little bit. I got, his song, long way to go in a short time to get there, but I'm going to try to get done a little bit early so we can answer some of those questions. So with that, I'll go ahead and dive in. The title of it is, Pitfalls, Landmines, and Best Practices. And you'll notice we're trying to focus on serious injuries and fatalities and some of the legal risk that come with that. I'm going to go ahead and tell you, I hope you never, ever have to deal with any serious injuries or fatalities. Like Greg said, I'm also a safety professional. So I'm in a CSP. I'm all about the prevention side. Sometimes I have to put two different hats on. I hope you never have one of these. I really do. But I can tell you, I've represented employers who have multiple degreed safety professionals on working for the company. They go way above and beyond. They're light years ahead of minimum standards set by OSHA, and they have really low recordable rates and incident rates, and their workers' comp costs are almost nothing. And on first glance, you think, man, this is an outstanding company. And then one day, somebody's killed or there's a serious injury and they have to pick up the phone and call OSHA. They've got the media there, they've got coroners there and police and folks like that. So I say all that to please keep in mind. And, one of the other areas I speak on a lot is how we measure safety performance. That was a big focus of mine in grad school. And I speak on that topic a lot, still research it a lot. But injury numbers and workers' comp costs and all that are what we would call result indicators. They're not always performance indicators. Seldom are they are. So these kind of things happen to even the best of companies. And you don't want to have this happen and not know what to do. Because I can tell you it is an experience that you'll never, ever want to repeat. But you would be remiss if you didn't at least plan for this and know what to do should this ever happen. Again, I hope you never do. I hope you never have to call me or any other lawyer because something like this has happened. Much rather deal with folks on the proactive side. So I want to get that out of the way. It's kind of an important disclaimer there. And I have to put this other disclaimer out there. I'm not going to read it to you. We have an intelligent audience. And if all I do is read slides and you're an intelligent audience, literate audience, either me or the slide's not necessary. So I won't read it. But I do want to point out, just because you participate in the webinar, it doesn't create any kind of attorney-client relationship. I kind of sound like one of those lawyer radio shows where it's like, every case is fact dependent. You should consult a lawyer and blah, blah, blah. But just because we answer some questions in here today doesn't create that kind of relationship. But if there's a need arises outside, feel free to contact me, and then we can go from there. I think everybody understands that and gets it. I start with this slide in a few different classes I do. I do one class on employment law for safety professionals. It's a 2-day class I do with ASSP. I say this quote in that one, and then I often say it when I do stuff with OSHA record keeping. And I do it in this, the famous quote by Mark Twain, and I think it really captures what I want many safety professionals to know. And I tell my students this too. Mark Twain said, "It ain't what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so." I teach some of our online classes too. I teach mainly on campus, but I teach some of our online classes. And we're always blessed to have experienced people in those classes. And we have these things called discussion boards. I'm sure many of you have probably taken an online class or know somebody who has, and they have to participate in discussion boards. And you want that engagement with the students, offering advice to each other. It's not just the instructor, talking. You want people to engage each other. And many times I'll have some of the experienced safety professionals who have a wealth of knowledge, and I'm thankful they're there. And in 95% of the cases, they'll chime in and give students excellent advice. And I don't have to say a thing, just, great job, great insight. But occasionally I will find the seasoned safety professional provide advice to maybe one of the students who's not experienced. And many times it's dealing with something that's a legal issue, and it's not correct advice. And I look back before becoming a lawyer, I thought many of those things too. I thought I understood everything about this OSHA world. It wasn't until I started practicing this field, I'm like, wow, there were a lot of things I thought was sure for sure, and this is how it was, and it just really isn't. And of course, as Greg knows, and probably some of the rest of you know, many times the answer is it depends. So please start with that kind of understanding. There's some things you'll know for sure, but always double check. So it ain't what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. I always start these out too. I want to say that this is a strategic balancing act. We're trying to maintain our professionalism and use our wisdom, and we want safety professionals involved in these kind of situations when they happen. And we're trying to fulfill our responsibilities to our employer and interact with OSHA or possibly other regulatory agencies, even the police and what have you, while at the same time asserting the employer's rights. Because if you don't assert those, many times, you may say things, you may provide documents to OSHA or other folks that you didn't have to provide that might create additional liabilities to you. So, we have a balancing act there between doing our responsibilities, the things that we have to respond to OSHA, and a lot of this is going to be focused on the OSHA perspective. Responding to them, we have responsibilities to do that. We need to make sure we do that with diligence, wisdom, and professionalism. But at the same time, we got to be prepared to assert our employee rights. So please know that I'm not advocating the scorched earth mentality that every time OSHA walks in your door, you need to ask them for a warrant and all that. And also, please know that I'm not anti-OSHA in any of this stuff. I'm a safety professional, so I'm for protecting the workers and what have you too. And I'm not anti-OSHA compliance officers. Most of the ones that I've dealt with, we've had a great working relationship with, and most of them conduct their job in a very professional manner. And it's not this adversarial type of situation, even when we may object to something they request. So please know that nothing I say in here is anti-OSHA. It's not anti-OSHA compliance officer. It's just what I do. I represent employers in these situations. So that's the perspective I'm coming from. Please, like I said, make sure that you maintain this mutual respect and professionalism and wisdom. It's not scorched earth mentality, but you would be remiss if you did not know what your rights are and you're not prepared in one of these kind of fatality catastrophe type situations. So, like I said, the focal events is dealing with fatalities and catastrophes, serious injuries with multi-employer work sites. I'm going to talk a little bit about multi-employer work site in a minute. And then the serious injuries, obviously fatalities, catastrophes, I mean, where you've got one or more of an employee, a worker on your site that's been killed. Maybe it's an amputation, hospitalization, loss of an eye, something you got to pick up the phone and call OSHA for, and it's a multi-employer work site. Those are always very serious situations. And then the serious injuries you experience as an employer, maybe where one of your workers has had, hospitalization, loss of an eye, an amputation, something that you got to pick up the phone and call OSHA. But keep in mind, these strategies exist in the strategies and the employer rights exist in all OSHA inspections, not just those that are triggered by one of these type of events. But certainly we have these type of events, and that's why I have the call out circle there. Keep in mind that the stakes are pretty high when we're talking about fatalities, multi-employer worksite serious injuries, and even serious injuries to your workplace, is that you've got to worry about the OSHA liabilities, but there can be civil liability beyond that context. Now, obviously, if it's your employee, many times you've got the exclusive remedy protections of workers' comp. It's not like your employee is going to go and sue you in tort, a negligence type action, because of workers' comp is in place to be the exclusive remedy for that. But if it's not your employee and it's a multi-employer work site, that could all completely change. And I have about 4 cases right now where the employer is being sued by the injured worker because it was a multi-employer work site and they were not the employee of the employer. Sometimes, and I have one other case where I'm involved with another law firm on this, where the employee was injured. It's not a multi-employer work site. They sue the manufacturer of a piece of equipment, and then the manufacturer of equipment that's being sued by the injured worker pulls the employer in for what we call apportionment. That means they may not be liable for a judgment. However, they're going to have to participate in that litigation because the manufacturer of that equipment is going to blame part of it on the employer. And, you want to make sure you're thinking about that too. And we don't see this a lot. I don't want to be one of these scare tactic attorneys or some who would, act like the criminal liability is, highly likely. We don't see a lot of criminal prosecutions, but it is out there. And when it happens, mostly that's happening through, in Kentucky, it'd be the Commonwealth Attorney. In Ohio, it'd be one of those pursuing a criminal prosecution. And there are provisions in the OSH Act for criminal liability. We don't see it a lot, but we do see it. I don't want to downplay it, but at the same time, I don't want to make it sound like it's this highly likely thing. But those are 3 areas of liability you got to worry about. And there have been attempts to revamp the OSH Act. We may see those going forward as we see administrations change. We may see some of the legislation proposed at a federal level get resurrected. And most of those proposals have included increased criminal penalties as well. So a lot of things you got to think about. And maybe it's not that big a deal when somebody just has a recordable, you're not having to pick up the phone and call OSHA. But when you have something go down, somebody's got to pick up the phone and call OSHA. There's a lot of moving parts, and you want to be extremely careful because you may hit your wagon to something that you didn't have to, and it's going to have serious consequences for you and your organization. Hit your wagon. By the way, that's an Eastern Kentucky expression. I grew up in the mountains of Eastern Kentucky. I know some of you probably thought I was from New York, but see, if we were live, I could hear you laughing. And right now, maybe you would. I don't know. So let's talk quickly about some requirements to report to federal OSHA, because I was talking about those things to pick up the phone. I suspect most of you already know this, but I'd be remiss if I didn't just review it real quickly. If you have a fatality, work-related death of 1 or more employees, you have 8 hours to call that into OSHA. Now, I have a note at the bottom, and I'm skipping down to the bottom bullet. Important, state OSHA plan times and methods, and I probably should also put this in here, and the triggers could vary. Like, for instance, I know Utah, I have a client that has some facilities in Utah, and the threshold for what you have to call in Utah is quite different than what we see at federal OSHA. Kentucky has some distinctions in what has to be reported and the timeframes and how it's reported to Kentucky OSHA. Now, I know if you're an Ohio employer, you're a federal plan state, so you're reporting it to federal OSHA, and this would apply to you. But if you've got facilities in other states that maybe in state plan OSHAs, you need to make sure that you know what the reporting requirements are in those states, because I've seen a lot of employers just go off the federal requirements and then not realize that their state requirements are different. So again, not everybody's going to deal with that because not every state is a state plan OSHA, like, Ohio. Serious injuries. These are work-related hospitalization, one or more employee, amputation, loss of an eye. Now, loss of an eye, I do record keeping stuff. I don't want to get into that, to the minutia of that, but that's when somebody's actually lost their eye, either through the trauma or through a surgery that's related to the incident. Technically, it's an enucleation. If you go in and read the preamble of the standard, find out what OSHA was thinking about, because many times that's what we have to do is get into the preamble of the standard. Usually that's your lawyer doing that when you're finding these things out. But those are serious injuries, and you've got 24 hours. Now, I will say it's when these serious injuries occur within 24 hours of the incident. That's the federal requirement. Like I said, states are different. Kentucky's different on that. How do you report it? Again, federally, pick up the phone, call the nearest OSHA area office. So you want to know these phone numbers long before this ever happens. There is the number. I went ahead and looked it up for the after hours option. So let's say it's after close of business, or it's on a weekend, or heaven forbid, it's a holiday. I've actually had that happen. I've had one case where the employee died, I think, a day and a half before Thanksgiving. And the employer was on shutdown the day following that. It was a third shift worker. And fortunately, I was involved at the outset, so we were still made the call. But just because it happens after hours on the weekend or OSHA's not there, that does not relieve you of these timeframes here. You have to still report these type of incidents to OSHA. Federal OSHA offers that application on its website. Some states don't. Kentucky does not. You just have phone options in Kentucky. Who reports? This is going to be critical, and it's going to come into play with a couple of our scenarios here in a second. Remember, the main responsibility is upon the deceased or injured worker's employer. That's really who has the obligation. This can get muddy in a multi-employer worksite situation. I've been involved in some of those. But technically, it's the responsibility upon the deceased injured worker's employer. We'll get into that more here in just one of the scenarios. So like I said, be careful on multi-employer worksite. So let's go ahead and get into it on one of the scenarios. First scenario, we've got really creative names here, Acme Manufacturing. Let's presume they're the host employer. They contract with a company called Spick and Span to do janitorial service at their manufacturing facility. Spick and Span, in turn, subcontracts floor stripping and waxing to Floor Pros. I'll get it out in a minute. And then Floor Pros, in turn, subcontracts it without the approval of Acme to the stripping service. So we have a situation with Joe's stripping service that while Joe is attempting to mix some compound, he is struck by a floor cleaning machine driven by Spick and Span employee. He's killed instantly. And I was kind of wondering, what your thoughts are, and let me get the chat feature pulled up here. If I can get that to do it. Not getting that little feature to pop up here at the bottom. What happens next in this kind of situation? Who reports the fatality to OSHA? And I was going to ask that there's a question. I think it's got my full screen PowerPoint up here, but I'll let you just kind of mull that over for a second. Who reports the fatality to OSHA? Will it be the host employer, Acme Manufacturing? Will it be Spick and Span? Will it be Floor Pros? Or is it Joe Doak's stripping service? Who's got the responsibility? So like I said, you don't have to chat in. Just kind of think that over for a second. This is a situation where, maybe Floor Pros doesn't understand that Joe Dokes has an incorporation, but he is the sole proprietor in it. They may or may not know Joe is an employee of his own business. I've had a situation similar to this. Now, I've changed the facts, the type of business, and all this, but by the way, every scenario I'm giving you today, I have lived it out at some point. I've changed some facts around and names of companies and all that. So there's some difference there. I'm not going to disclose any of that, but these are all inspired by real life events. In this situation, I mean, technically, if Joe was an employee of Joe's stripping service, Joe Dokes stripping service, they have the responsibility. But what if nobody knows that's on site? And I've had this question arise, like, well, maybe he's not employed. Do we even have to report it to OSHA? And in some of these situations, we went to the next closest person. In this case, would be Floor Pros, who subcontracted to Joe's, who may call it in. But what if the decision is made that, well, Joe's a sole proprietor, he's not technically employed, so let's not call OSHA? I've had that come up. Trust me, if Joe Dokes is dead, there's going to be EMS, there's going to be a coroner on site, there's going to be media, very likely, those kind of things. The word's going to get out, and frequently EMS, fire departments, people like that, they call OSHA when they do these things. OSHA's probably going to get involved. Now, at the end of the day, maybe there was no employee-employer relationship, but that's not going to be immediately evident in a situation like this, particularly with Floor Pros not knowing who Joe Dokes is and his structure of his business and all that. Somebody probably needs to call this into OSHA, because if they don't, and then OSHA finds out they should have, and the time frame passes, that's going to be another citation later for not contacting OSHA, and they issue those quite frequently. So a good point, particularly for the host employer, is having provisions to know who all is on your site and the relationship they have there, just for nothing else, knowing who would have a reporting responsibility. And I've actually had those kind of things happen where I have said, listen, and most of the time I'm represent host employers here, but I've represented some subcontractors too. It's like, listen, given the circumstances, somebody's probably going to call OSHA. Don't make it be us if it's your employee. So now, if you know all these things ahead of time and maybe you've got this buttoned up, maybe you don't have a need, but generally speaking, that's not going to happen. You need to have a plan. So what liabilities do Acme, Spick and Span, Floor Pros, and even Joe Dokes have here to consider? Really, probably all three of those liabilities in that liability circle I gave you earlier is going to be at play here. Because like I said, if somebody's dead, there's a coroner, there's folks like that there. Joe is probably not going to be considered an employee. I know there's these things called up the ladder defenses in workers' comp. There's a good chance maybe that Joe could sue Acme, or possibly Spick and Span and Floor Pros, may sue all three of them in a tort suit there. So, and based on where you're at jurisdiction, could there be a criminal investigation? There certainly could. I got a call not long ago from an employer in Michigan, had a fatality, and the police wanted to do their own investigation and would not let the employer come in. Now, I didn't get involved until long after this. Of course, I think if I'd been involved from the get-go, we'd had a conversation about that. But, there could be that investigation by the police department there going on too. So there's a lot of liabilities, and really all of these entities here would have to worry about those. I mean, Joe Dokes' company, if he owns it, depends on how that's structured, they may have some exclusive remedy workers' comp protection there, but these others have got to think about the whole ball of wax. When will OSHA arrive to conduct the investigation? By the way, I've got my slides and a checklist here. If you see me looking over, I want to make sure I hit all these points here with you. When will OSHA arrive to conduct the inspection? Good chance in a fatality situation like this that OSHA is going to show up, if not the same day, the next day. Now, some of the serious injuries, I'm talking about amputations, hospitalizations, loss of an eye. I know there's been a big trend for OSHA to do the RRT, rapid response, and they'll try to do this by mail. And I know COVID has certainly increased the instances of that occurring. OSHA might do it, but if it's a fatality, like in this situation, they're going to come on site, likely the next day. So there's not a lot of time to get things ready for OSHA when they come. The next question, when do you start completing the investigation? And I got the chat here, and I want to see kind of what the thought here. When do you need to start completing the incident investigation? If a few of you would just chime in on the chat, I'd like to know what your thoughts are. Cynthia says immediately. Sherry says immediately. As soon as possible, Edward. I suspect we're going to see this. The chamber is within 24 hours, certainly within the 24 hours. I do want to caution you on your immediate response. I'm not disagreeing with the immediate response. It's just how you do it immediately. If you start doing the incident investigation immediately, and so many employers are ready to jerk out their incident report, which they use for all their injuries in their facility. And I know Greg has an appreciation for this, but that becomes what we call a record kept in the ordinary course of business. Likely going to be completely discoverable by OSHA, by the other attorneys involved if there's civil litigation, because even if you get somebody involved a little bit later on from a legal standpoint, that's not protected. And people make stupid statements on incident investigation reports. And trust me, as a safety professional, like I said, I know we have a duty, a charge to keep things like this from ever happening again. And we want to be honest. We want to learn from these things. But there's ways we can do that, yet still protect the communication and what's going to be discoverable a little bit later to OSHA. I've had employers not get me involved until they got the citation. I've had employers not get me involved until, OSHA's been on site for 3 days. And everything they've done up to that point until they engage me is going to be completely discoverable. And so one of the things you want to think about is if and trust me, I'm not trying to say you got to call an attorney. These are serious situations with serious implications. You don't need to call an attorney on everything that comes up your facility, but you need to at least consider it in these situations. So, if an attorney's involved and they're directing your investigation, they're involved. We call that work product protection. And you do want to interview witnesses. Keep in mind the notes that you make if an attorney's not directing you to do that, witness statements that you've gathered, those kind of things could become discoverable. So it is a consideration. Do you want legal counsel involved and them direct this so that you protect some of this stuff? Because we can still achieve the objectives as safety professionals in preventing this from happening, yet still protect some of the employer's liabilities. Like I said, if an incident report is completed before there's a relationship or, the attorney's involved in this, it's going to be hard to protect. There's actually some interesting case law on that. I've used a couple of cases. One is a case involving Sprint, a telecommunications company. And then there's another one involving a trucking accident where the safety department went out. They started doing their investigation. And then about 24 hours into it, realized, oops, we might ought to get a lawyer involved. And the courts there, and it went all the way up into the courts of appeals, found the incident report completely discoverable. So some of that stuff, you get out there. We want to interview witnesses. We want to get photos gathered. We want to learn. We want to prevent it, but be careful about how you do it because it could be discoverable. Same goes with emails. A lot. Emails is the death knell to so many people. It's kind of like social media. If you're the safety manager, to whom is your first call made? Many times there's going to be folks above you in the chain of command that needs to be called. And this is going to be different for every organization. But given the circumstances, you might want to consider who do you want to get involved at the very outset of this. So keep that in mind. So if and Edward had commented gathering photos, evidence, isolation of the incident, Seeing somebody said company lawyer. If you have in-house counsel, that certainly is going to be one of the first calls you made. I got a call. It's been several months back, but it was 11:48 at night. I remember that. I get a call and I'm looking at it. I'm like, this is in-house counsel for one of my clients. Something's not right for him to call me at 11:59 at night, and something bad had happened. But the local safety professionals knew to give that person a call, and we got involved at the outset. So keep that in mind. All right, let me just kind of minimize this chat here. So what should each entity in my scenario there do to prepare, or even one we're looking at scene preservation? That's one of the things I want to point out, is that you do want to preserve the scene as much as you possibly can. I understand sometimes with different business, different environments, there's limitations on it. There is no black and white rule that says, here's what you have to do. Although I will tell you, if you've called OSHA to report this, discuss that with them then. What do you want us to preserve? Or tell them, here's what we have done. Here's what we have preserved the scene with. Is this okay? Kind of get those reassurances there. I understand sometimes preserving the scene may be shutting down your entire operation, and maybe that's not reasonable. If it's not a big hamper on the business, preserving that scene as much as you possibly can. Remember, fatalities, there's going to be other entities there that might kind of come over and kind of take jurisdiction of the scene. That happens a lot with coroners and EMS and the police, and you want to cooperate with them, but do your best to preserve the scene. I don't have this in here, but one of the things, I had a client once that had an employee he was killed tragically, and it was almost instantly, and it was a horrific fatality scene that we had to call in a contractor who specializes in cleaning up blood and that kind of style. Leave it at that. And just for them to be able to access the building in the area, there had to be some cleanup. If something like that takes place, you need to make sure you document every step that was taken. If there was any kind of disturbance that was made, why it had to be disturbed, who did it, maybe photos of what it was like before, because you don't want to get into something, and I know Greg appreciates, called spoliation, meaning you maybe negligently or hopefully not intentionally got rid of evidence or what have you. Those are always concerns that'll come out. Yeah, and if lawyers get involved early from the other folks, you'll get these things called litigation holds. They want you to preserve emails, electronic communications, that kind of stuff. So you do want to preserve the scene to the extent you possibly can. And it's different in every case. I wish there was some black and white recipe I could give you, but there's not. Documentation. You want to make sure that certainly things like your OSHA 300 logs are ready and updated already, because OSHA has a right to inspect, to have access to those within 4 hours of request. Not long ago, I saw my first OSHA citation to an employer, OSHA saying that they did not get the OSHA logs within 4 hours. And we had pretty strong evidence indicating the compliance officer said, well, just scan them or email them. It'll be okay a little bit later. Those have to be ready to go within 4 hours. Things like your HAZCOM program, they have a right to ask for that, even if it's beyond the scope of the inspection, a fatality type inspection. Also, other documentation that you may have related to the scene. Certainly if it's something that's protected, you want to have that clearly labeled, set aside. But there's going to be other things. If it involves a piece of equipment, like a crane or something, they're going to want inspection records, the operator's manual, training records for employees who operated that, witnesses. You're going to want to know who those are, and somebody chimed in, interviewing witnesses. Even if you haven't interviewed, you've identified who they are. It's certainly good to begin learning about some of the things that they've told you. We've got to be careful how we document it, but knowing who they are, and also knowing their role in the organization. Are they a member of management, or are they someone who works, who's not management? If you're a union environment, that's usually people who are within the collective bargaining agreement versus those who aren't. Because it has a lot to do with how you respond when OSHA wants to interview them, which they will, and what are your rights during those interviews. which we'll get to that, but I'll let a little bit out of the bag, is that, if it's a member of management, somebody who's an agent of the company, the employer has a right to have counsel or some other member of management be present during that interview and to help with that situation, not to coach them, but to at least know if things are going astray. And I've seen it go astray before. So you want to kind of know who those folks are and preparing them. You don't want to coach folks, but there's nothing wrong with explaining to folks what their rights are. Do I have to talk to OSHA? Do I have to allow OSHA to tape record me? I had this not long ago in a case where the OSHA compliance officers wanting to tape record stuff. And I'm like, no, we're not doing it. Of course, he put it up, and because they don't have a right to do that. With the rank and file employee, and I'm using that term kind of loosely here, they have a right to be interviewed privately. OSHA has a right to interview them privately. It's probably a better way to say it. And things may take place during that. I've also seen OSHA, take notes on one of their sheets. Compliance officer takes some notes down, or maybe they're trying to capture what they say during the witness interview and then slide a piece of paper across the table and say, please sign this. It's your statement. And I remember I had a case, it's been several years ago, but I had a maintenance manager tell me something when I interviewed them. I didn't get involved until the citations were issued, and we're preparing, looking at the strengths of the case. And then into the litigation of citation, I get something from, and this was a federal OSHA case, not in Ohio, long way away. And OSHA's attorney sent me some request for admission, is like, admit that this is the signed statement of the maintenance supervisor. And the thing he signed was nothing like what he told me. So I had to fly back to this place, had a conversation with the maintenance manager, and he said, well, that's not really what I said. I just went ahead and signed it. I figured it was okay. And it was a killer to our case, I'll be honest with you. So we got to be prepared with the witnesses. Those are things we can prepare. What are we going to do? I mean, you can't prepare people to talk about an event that hasn't happened. But as a company, we know what our strategy is. I hope that makes sense. And having an inspection plan and a team ready and knowing when to activate them, which is at the outset of one of these kind of tragedies, is key. That's one thing, a big thing you can do to prepare. I'll go through some of these other scenarios a little bit quickly here. Scenario 2, some facts. Automotive parts manufacturer, it's a union environment, OSHA complaint inspection. So this isn't a serious injury or fatality. I realize that seems to be outside the scope of what I'm talking about, but these same principles hold true. Again, inspiring by real events. The complaint involves one particular hoist in the work environment, and it's precipitated by a worker injury. It wasn't a serious injury that required reporting, but somebody did get hurt on it. It was a minor injury. They get an OSHA complaint. OSHA comes in to inspect the situation. Here's what OSHA requests. They want a walk-around inspection of the entire facility. They want to interview line employees in private, interview supervisors in private, and they ask for a bunch of documents. I'm going to give you the list of documents, but before we do that, I would be interested to, and let me get my chat feature to work again here. There we go. What do you think about the? Let me get it back up here. Sorry about this. Like I said, I'm getting better at this. What do you think about the walk-around inspection of the entire facility? Are you going to permit this walk-around inspection of the entire facility? Again, just kind of chime in on the chat. So we have one yes, that you're going to let them walk around the entire facility. Jennifer says no. Edward says no. Tony, all right. You guys are very smart on this. You've probably heard about this. And Rosemary says, score them the quickest way possible. I'm with you, Rosemary. I would caution, quickest way is sometimes not the best way. We don't want it to look like we're being subversive and that kind of stuff. I don't mean that. But if you know that there's a lot of liabilities in an area they're going to have to walk through, maybe there's an alternative that's reasonable, okay, reasonable. But I've had this happen on numerous occasions. I had it happen on once, a similar situation, not this one, but OSHA came in the machine that they were there to inspect, because it was an injury, was literally on the other side of the wall from the conference room. OSHA asked for an entire facility, and they took him on a tour. The end result of that was was well into six figures, and a nasty press release and lots of stuff because they said, okay, we'll take you around for the whole place. And it resulted in multiple repeats. None of the repeats involved the machine. You have a right as an employer, if it's this on a complaint inspection, an incident inspection, something like that, to limit that to the scope of what they're there to inspect, investigate. That is an employer right that sometimes, not all compliance officers are this way. Many of them are very professional. They understand they're there to investigate this one thing. But I have seen the other side. Compliance officers, like everything, most are great, but you'll have some to go astray. What about interviewing and line employees in private? What do you think about that? Do they have a right to do that? Sherry says yes. I think many of you say yes because I've kind of already let that out of the bag. They have a right to do that. They have a right to talk to those folks in private. There's nothing you can do about it. Many times, if I know who OSHA is going to interview and they're not a management employee, I have a script that I will go over with them that just says, here are what your rights are. I don't do anything else because any conversation I have with them, they're not my client, would be completely discoverable. You have to be very careful with that kind of stuff. But, you can let them know what their rights are, but never, never, never intimidate, try to coerce one of these folks. Let them talk to OSHA and be free with that. You don't, number one, it's just not the right thing to do. Number two, it could get you in a lot of trouble. So don't do that. But what about the supervisors in private? Do they have a right to do that? Or let me rephrase the question. Should you allow them to interview supervisors in private? I see one yes, I think came through. Edward says no. I don't want to prolong this, but I'm going to go ahead and say no is the right answer here. Because if you have a right to be there, or better yet, maybe a right to have your attorney present during one of these, you want to take advantage of that. Because like I said, I remember the thing I told you, the supervisor, maintenance manager just signed that statement, didn't even read it. And the compliance officer said, here's what you said. And I've seen this several times where I won't call out any, it's not federal OSHA, I'll say that. And they've slided across the table and it was a management member who's being interviewed. And it's just the compliance officer's notes. There are no complete sentences or anything. And they ask them to sign it. That could be very detrimental later. So you want to take advantage of allowing counsel, if not counsel, somebody, other management in the company to be there to be involved with that too. So documents, let's move on to the document request here. And I'll probably, I'm not, for time's sake, I won't get into that. And Greg, Andrea, let me know if I'm running a little short. Let me go ahead here and just close this chat so I can see this. I'll kind of go over this with you and we won't do the response like that. OSHA's document request, they wanted the 300 logs. I already told you they have a right to that. Make sure they're ready to go. I had one employer once, they're having an OSHA inspection. I wasn't there, but I'm joining in via phone, and they said, OSHA wants the 300 logs. Our nurse keeps those. She's out on vacation this week. I'm like, okay, what's the problem? Well, they're in a file cabinet. It's locked. She's the only one who has the key. I'm like, well, you guys got a drill, right? So you don't want to get that citation. 300 logs, previous 5 years, make sure they're updated, ready to go. HAZCOM program, that is one of the things by reg they have a right to ask for, even if they're not there with related to a HAZCOM issue. Beyond that, it becomes kind of a case-by-case situation. They wanted the incident report for the injured worker and the accident investigation report. If there's no protection there, like attorney-client, work product, something like that, then OSHA's probably going to be entitled to that. And if you don't give it to them, many times they will subpoena it. I've had OSHA subpoena a lot of things on me. We've usually prevailed in fighting those, but anyway, if it's not protected, they're probably going to get the incident report, the witness statements, any other investigative report. this particular scenario I'm giving you, like I said, inspired by real events, they wanted near miss reports. And they really wanted them for the whole facility. Of course, we're like, heck no, you ain't getting that, because they could use that as evidence for a willful citation a little bit later on. It might be near miss reports, and we did confine and say, we'll send you near miss reports as they relate to the scope of your inspection, but we're not sending the entire facility. So keep that in mind. Hoist crane training document. They're going to be entitled to that, because remember, that involves the scope of the inspection, the scope of what they're there for, the investigate complaint. That involves a hoist. So those the training documentation, any procedures for hoist operation, inspection records for the hoist, any modifications made to the hoist, they ask for that in this particular situation. The operator's manual, they ask for, and they're going to be entitled to all that. They also wanted the lockout tagout program. This is one of those situations where, this didn't involve lockout. And, if an employer has this outstanding lockout program, they've got everything buttoned up, and they're confident, maybe you do it just as an expression of goodwill, but if there's some uncertainty there and you give them documents that are beyond the scope of what they're there to inspect, they could scrutinize them and you could get cited for something related to that. The lockout program is something we objected to and were successful. And when CPR first aid training records, arguably beyond the scope of the inspection, but some states, Kentucky being one of them, has a specific reg on what you're supposed to have for CPR or first aid training, as it says. And, we produced those. This company was buttoned up, tons of folks trained. They all had their hepatitis B shots. And they also wanted the bloodborne pathogen program. Of course, I had to ask OSHA, I'm like, why do you need this? Well, there could have been blood. Was there blood? I mean, there's a difference. Could have been. Was there an allegation that we didn't follow bloodborne pathogens? We ended up giving it to them because this company was outstanding in that. It was something we shown, but that's something we could have possibly objected to. They wanted disciplinary records for all safety violations for all employees for the past 2 calendar years. Again, that's something that's going to be potentially opening up Pandora's box. And we said no to this. And I had a long conversation with the manager, the compliance officer's manager of this. And of course, my question is why? I mean, is there something alleged here? Is it within, because on the surface, it doesn't seem like it's within the scope of the inspection. And the response was, we employee misconduct is a defense to a citation. We need to evaluate that to see. I'm like, so we're having to defend a citation that hasn't been issued yet. Interesting. I said, one's related to the hoist operation, and what you're gladly, but the other stuff's way beyond that. They wanted internal audit reports for the last year, comprehensive. Of course, there is federal OSHA has a policy on this saying that they're not traditionally going to ask for an employer's, internal audits that they do in good faith. And I've had to remind them that, that's not even your policy. If you want inspection records for the hoist, things involved in this, okay. But just broad facility-wide audits, no. Because I've seen that happen too, where there are things in audits that were not taken care of. There's photos and comments, we got to fix this. And then when OSHA gets their hand, they might issue a citation. Now, we'll tell you audit reports, OSHA may not be successful in getting those during the inspection but if you contest the citation, and then we're into discovery and litigation, that's a whole different story because we have the rules of civil procedure involved, and many things are discoverable in that context that might not be in the inspection. So, and they wanted a building evacuation map, which, we didn't have a problem with that, no big deal. But you got to be careful. So I hope you learned something from that. Let's go to another scenario. Like I said, trying to teach some scenarios here. Food products manufactured, multiple sites throughout the U.S., partial crushing injury in a packaging machine, facility never been inspected at OSHA, and they're here for the serious injury investigation. They wanted the incident report, 300 logs, previous incident report, witness statements, all the employer's photos that were taken with the investigation. We've kind of already went over these with another one. I'm showing you that this is something that frequently gets requested. A lot of those things there, if not all, are going to be discoverable. The 300 logs, you got to give those to OSHA. But the incident report, witness statements, things like that, if they've not some kind of protection there, OSHA's probably going to get their hands on those too, as well as the photos. The purchase documents on the machine. they're going to be entitled to though. The risk assessments performed by the employer. It's kind of like internal audits here. If it's related to that, probably going to have to give those up, but facility-wide, we're going to have an issue with that. Machine guard inspection records for the entire facility. Again, you're here for this machine, not the entire facility. And they also wanted to walk through the entire facility. This was the reason that was given by the compliance. By the way, this is a federal, not Ohio. I really don't think any of these scenarios were from Ohio. So I'll give the kudos there to the folks in Ohio, federal OSHA. The reason they gave to the employer, and I wasn't involved in this until this happened, they said because you've had other facilities throughout, in the state. There's other plants you have in the state. Therefore, we need to walk through the entire facility. I'm like, and the safety manager was keen on this. Like, this doesn't sound right. Gave me a call, and he retracted the request for the entire facility. And they wanted members of management during interviews to sign a statement that says, "I swear to tell the truth." And it's like, well, they don't have to sign a statement. They have an obligation for that anyway. We're not signing that. There's no law that says they have to sign this. They have to tell you the truth anyway by statute. And you never know what's also in documents like that. And they wanted to audio record management. We're like, nope, ain't happening. Scenario 4, plastics manufacturer. Fingertip amputation during a maintenance activity. They notified OSHA on April 15th. So guess what? Yeah, they're a little bit late on this. And this was right after the reg change federally requiring reporting of amputations. Like Kentucky, we've had to do that since 2006. So they were technically late on reporting this. It was beyond the 24 hours. OSHA doesn't show up to June 1st. They issue citations on September 30th. 4 citations, 10 collective items. One of the things they got cited for was the failure to timely report the amputation. Now, I hope there's some time frame here that's ticking off in your mind. In essence, what's happened is OSHA has failed to satisfy the 6-month statute of limitations. And if you're familiar with the Volks case, we talked about Volks, and then OSHA recently, 2016, had changed the reg to make it what we call a continuing duty standard, saying that basically when OSHA lost in the Volks case, which the Volks case involved OSHA citing an employer, as AKM LLC, doing business as Volks Constructors, for not updating OSHA logs. And they said, yeah, you're right. We did violate it, but that was beyond 6 months ago when we were in violation. And OSHA said, oh, no, you got a continuing obligation. This went all the way to the DC Circuit Court of Appeals. And in that, the DC Circuit Court of Appeals sided with the employer. And the employer had lost at every stage up to that point and said, no, the statute says 6 months. This reg doesn't say it's continuing obligation. Sorry, OSHA, you missed your 6-month statute of limitations. And then we saw, like I said, in 2016, they amended that. But then in 2017, change of the guard in DC, we saw the Congressional Review Act getting used to basically put it back to 6 months. Here, this employer got cited for not reporting the amputation timely. I didn't get involved until they got cited. And we were able to successfully get that one withdrawn, because when OSHA's attorney looked at it, which, by the way, federal OSHA taps attorneys from the U.S. Solicitor's Office to represent them. I had a conversation with that attorney, who I've got to know. She's a great attorney, good relationship. And she's like, yeah, I see what you're saying. So, but anyway, they had a bunch of other citations for other things. They, again, wanted 5 years of OSHA logs. They're entitled to the incident report lockout tagout program. Lockout was involved with this machine, so we had to give that. They did want to inspect the entire facility. Again, I was involved. They inspected the entire facility. Most of the other citations came out. Again, they wanted management to sign written statements, and unfortunately they did, and those came back to bite us a little bit later. One more, and then we'll move to some slides and we'll cover some information. So the client's a general contractor, warehouse, building, construction, fatality inspection. This is a multi-employer work site. I'll go ahead and tell you that. You'll figure that out. Steel erection subcontractor selects a steel supplier. Then the truck driver, who's an employee of the steel supplier, is struck by excavation equipment and killed. Truck driver is not wearing high visibility clothing, was talking on a cell phone when they were struck, and warned by the general contractor about not wearing high vis clothing on on only one other occasion. I probably could have worded that a little bit better, sorry. And the backup alarm is fully functional. That's kind of the background here. OSHA requests to the general contractor, they want 300 logs. As you can tell, they're going to get those. They wanted the general contractor's incident report, photos, and witness statements. There's no counsel involved in this, so OSHA is able to get all of that. The site safety inspection audit records for the entire project, OSHA ended up in getting those because, like I said, there was no involvement during the inspection. It was after inspection. But that's something you would think about limiting the scope on those requests. Training program for subcontractors, that's something that would have been within the scope of that, and a copy of all the projects there. One of the things I didn't mention earlier, and I think I had it on my checklist, and I certainly meant to mention this earlier, is if you are not familiar with OSHA's multi-employer work site citation or multi-employer work site policy, I encourage you to go do that. And I've written that down, and I'll give that to you. Some of you, many of you probably already read that. But I went ahead and wrote, the site, it's called a compliance directive. Those are CPLs. Now that's OSHA policy. Those aren't regs. That's not going to find those in the CFRs. This is a matter of OSHA policy. However, it's been around since 1999, the current version, and it's been upheld numerous times in court. It would be really hard to say that policy is not law and therefore we don't have obligations. Many times we have to make arguments that we were not a controlling employer, a creating employer, exposing employer, or the correcting employer. There's 4 types of employers in that. So you want to make sure that you consider that. That first scenario I gave you, Acme Construction is likely what we would call the controlling employer there. But many times OSHA will cite in the alternative. They'll say, was the controlling and or correcting employer. The controlling employers who controls the site, probably the equipment, that kind of stuff. The creating employers who created the hazard may not have been their employees that were exposed, but they created the hazard. That would probably be more like the spick and span employee who was operating a piece of equipment. And then you have the exposing employee. That's the employer. That's the employer whose employees are exposed to the hazard that's created. And then the correcting, maybe it wasn't their employees. Maybe they don't control it. Maybe they didn't even create it, but they may have responsibility to correct the hazard or notify people. And multi-employer worksite, we could have a whole separate webinar on that. But do keep that in mind. The citation is CPL 2-00-124. And I believe the current edition still from the December 99. You can find that on the OSHA website pretty easy. It's a really good read. And if you're not up on multi-employer work sites, you need to do that. And by the way, you may say, well, we're not construction. We don't have that. If you've got contractors in and out of your facility, you need to know about it. And that hits a lot of people. You have temp employees. You're a multi-employer work site. So you need to make sure you're up to speed on that. I had to go back through my notes here and make sure that I hit that. So copy of the contracts, they're going to be entitled to that because they need to evaluate the relationships between those contracts are very important pieces of evidence that OSHA is going to look at in making decisions on who they're creating, controlling. And many times those can be a shield for employers as well. They wanted to interview the general contractor's management members privately by phone. They wanted the project manager, the corporate safety director, and the site superintendent. And in real life, this actually occurred. And, sometimes things are said during those, admissions are made by employers. I've had to talk to some supervisors and maintenance managers and people like that saying, listen, answer the questions that are posed to you. Not the question you think they're going to ask or the question that they should have asked. Answer the question that was posed by them. So anyway, and in that situation, it came away, it didn't help us. So what are some takeaways for this immediate aftermath of the inspection? And this has been the focus of my presentation. Got some more slides and we'll go through those kind of quickly. There's more informational purposes for you. What are the main takeaways as you deal with these fatalities, catastrophes in the wake of it, the immediate aftermath? Well, first, I want to reiterate, do the right thing. Do the right thing. Don't ever try to hide Well, we want to protect the employer's rights. We're not giving up more than we have to, but we're not going to massage records, change records later, things like that. That's against the statute, and it's just not the right thing. Do the right thing first in caring for the worker, caring for your other workers, because they're going to be traumatized. I can tell you, I've been in a lot of fatality situations. It is a bad, bad situation. I'm sure some of you probably experienced it, and you agree with me. You're going to have other employees that are significantly impacted by this, and then also the families that are involved. Sometimes you do have to be careful in dealing with families, because sometimes you want to do certain things, and I'm not telling you not to do anything or buying food or things like that, but you do need to sometimes be careful, because you don't want it to look like, particularly in a multi-employer worksite situation, look like you're offering something as a settlement or something like that. You have to be careful, run that by your in-house counsel, your HR department, and counsel if they're involved. Preserve the evidence in the scene. And if you have to change things, make sure there is a log of what you did and how you did it. Cooperate with the local authorities, but understand what your rights are. Like I said, I had an employer who they let the police department go in and they excluded them from the building. Like, I don't think that's necessarily right. But you're also wanting to preserve the rights. A balancing act there. Plan. Have a plan for how you're going to deal with these kind of things. Know who the phone calls are going to be made and the steps. Hopefully you never have to put it in use, but you need to plan ahead of time. Consider protecting communications in your employer records. Like I said, having things protected goes a long way. Control the inspection. I mean, you have rights during this, and have that communication, not in a harsh or scorched earth fashion with OSHA. Say, okay, we're going to cooperate. We're going to do what we need to do, but we're also going to keep it within the scope, and we're aware what our rights are. And as much as possible, you control the inspection. You maintain control with the media and other external entities, and then strategically work to prevent this from ever happening again. Because the last thing you want is repeats and failure to abates, and worse yet, somebody else getting hurt or dying. So those are kind of the big takeaways, and I hope those scenarios helped you understand what those are. A couple of things I'm going to go through these slides real quick, and then we'll do some questions. After it's over, you'll have a closing conference. Good chance you'll have an idea what the citations are. But I had this happen not long ago. We got a whole lot more than what they said in the closing conference. But you need to anticipate and watch for citations coming, because you have response deadlines there that are very important. And you've got to respond timely. Kind of have an idea what you're going to do if you get cited. Are you going to have an informal contest? That's the pre-contest, pre-litigation. Settlement. I usually prepare employers for that. I usually don't attend those unless they're going to have counsel there. And sometimes in union situations, I might, because they may have union counsel there. Know what you're willing to take on the settlement and what have you. Know if you're going to contest or not, and know what your deadlines are. But again, know your employer rights. Know these are essential elements of a citation. They have to be in writing, signed by the director. Describe the violation particularity. Have to be timely. I discussed that. Specifies the penalty served by employer mail. Keep in mind, you got to post those for 3 days. You have 15 days to file a notice of contest. And if you have an informal conference with OSHA, that does not stop the clock ticking on that 15 working days from the time you are served with the citation. I've had employers let that get away from them. You may have a willful, a serious, a repeat, other than serious, de minimis. You don't want failure to abate, because those are daily penalties. And that's really not a new citation. They go back and reclassify the one you didn't abate, and then they tack on those penalties. Serious, most of the citations are going to have penalties. They're going to have serious on them. A repeat is when you've failed. You've been cited for the same standard or substantially similar hazard. They can issue repeats with general duty clause. Other than serious, may have a small monetary penalty, and de minimis, we don't see them. These are the stakes. These are the current penalties as of today. I went and double checked those. As you know, federal OSHA, those are changing. Some states have updated their penalty structure, such as California and Virginia. I had a Virginia case not long ago, and they utilized the new penalty structure. Kentucky, we're still under the old one, but that's what the stakes are today. Keep in mind, OSHA has a burden of proof. They have to show the standard applies. There was non-compliance. Employees were exposed or had access to it, and the employer knew or should have known. It's constructive knowledge, and they have to categorize. They have to, prove the categorization of that. is appropriate. And it's a preponderance of the evidence is the standard of proof. Now, if you get into willful land, they have to show a violation, all the things we just talked about, plus they have to show there was either intentional, knowing, or voluntary disregard or plain indifference by the employer. You have defenses to OSHA citations, unpreventable, unforeseeable employee misconduct. Those can be difficult to raise, particularly if during interviews, skeletons come out of the closet when we see the employer hasn't had a history of holding people accountable, or there was no efforts on the employer to go out and look for noncompliance. That's usually how most employers lose that defense. And then there's others. I've listed them here. Obviously, if you're at this stage of contesting, you probably have some legal advice on hand. And hopefully, as Greg pointed out at the outset, they know something about OSHA. Just because you know something about the EEOC doesn't mean you know a lot about OSHA. The general duty clause, I put it in there. I've seen OSHA cite a lot of employers. Sometimes they'll amend a citation to make it a general duty if they're not going to be able to prevail on that. Have a case with that right now. This is the 5A1. A lot of people wonder, why doesn't OSHA issue citations to employees? Because 5B says the employee shall comply. Problem is the statute doesn't provide remedies for OSHA against the employee. Yeah, they're supposed to, but there's no teeth to that in the act. So if they're going to do a general duty clause, they have to show these things. These are the things they have to show. They also have to show them a lot of the same elements as a regular citation, but you can see it's a little bit different. I've put that in there just for your information. You'll get the PowerPoints. And a lot of people say, how are they classified? Well, general duty can be a repeat. It can be a willful. It's the same as all the others. Penalties, it's just like the others. Can it be willful? Yes, it can. Can it be a repeat? Yes, it can. Can OSHA cite an employer for failure to comply with the industry or consensus standard? They can use that to show industry, they can use that to show certain elements of it, but just the mere fact you didn't do a consensus standard is not, but those can come into play. And can they do a specific standard and a general duty? I've seen them do that, but if you're savvy in contesting the citation, you know that they're not supposed to, and we've got those withdrawn. And then some other defenses, and I'll leave that there for you. What can you do to be ready? Assess the hazards, prevent the injuries, know what your reporting requirements are, have the records ready to go. If you're doing auditing, I don't mean your normal inspection stuff, but consider attorney-client relationships there. Giving you my email, I think we have just a couple of minutes here for questions. I like I said, I had a long way to go and short time to get there, but I'll do my best to answer whatever questions that you have. I think that's Q&A, so I'll go over to that.
All right, so I'm going to bring Joe Blower off of mute. He's actually on our committee and he has a question. So go ahead and do that. Joe, you should be able to speak.
Can you hear me, Andrea?
We can.
Okay. I just wanted to mention, if I could, that we're kind of proud of the fact that last year for 2020, we had 0 accidents. First time in the history of the company, we finished up with 0 accidents, no injuries, and we have now completed 4 years without a lost time accident. So we was recognized by the BWC for that. Like I say, not really important to anybody but us, but that's one thing that we did do.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing.
Thanks.
All right. Any other questions for Barry?
Barry, I think we did have one question that came in pretty early on from Ed.
Okay.
And he wanted to know if you could speak to, can you over-report to OSHA?
Oh, you're so right, Greg. I did remember. Yes, you can. There's a couple of different angles on that. I mean, we can talk about in the record keeping context. If you've got temps on site, you don't want injuries reported on both logs. OSHA's real clear. It should only be on the person who controls the day-to-day activity. That's the employer for record keeping. Now, remember, the reporting requirements are in that same reg. Can you over-report? Yeah, there have been lots of employers who will just have a recordable and not understand their obligation, pick up the phone and call OSHA and just report everything that happens. I don't advise that. You don't have an obligation to do that. The situation I gave you there was scenario 1, where I was like, we're probably going to call OSHA because in a situation like that, where you've got coroners and EMS and all those people involved, it's going to likely get out, and OSHA's probably going to be involved anyway, and you don't want to be caught with your pants down. So you can over-report. The short answer is yes, you can. You need to be careful if you're saying, well, we're going to choose not to report it out of fear of over-reporting. If you've got circumstances like these fatalities and catastrophes, it's probably better to err on the side of caution rather than get yet another citation. Because if you didn't report it and they find out through the media or some other way, it's probably not going to help you during the inspection, because they'll come and open one even if they find out it wasn't really an employee. We don't have jurisdiction here.
Awesome. We just had another one come in. It was in line with 3 contractors. They report and you report the death.
Actually, who reports the death to OSHA technically is who the deceased employee's employer is. They have the obligation. But if they were to refuse to, which I've been in a situation like that, that's where I've had that conversation like, listen, somebody's going to call them. And if we call them, it could create, liability for you as the employer. Even though they got reported, OSHA might still cite you as the employer for not reporting it. I wish there was a nice black and white, clear answer to those kind of situations, but it really truly is a case by case. But you can't over-report. And if it's contractors, multi-employer work site like that, technically the responsibility is upon the employer or the deceased employee to call.
Awesome. All right. I think that does it for questions. And if I see any more pop up in the next couple of minutes, I'll make sure we do get those answered. I'm going to go ahead and
real quick, Barry, also, I just saw where OSHA just released on I think it's the 15th of this month, those penalties are going up again.
Yeah. I meant to mention
not
that.
significantly,
Exactly, that's what they are, but it's a January.
Yeah, just a couple grand. Yeah, a couple $1,000s in like another day or two.
Yep.
all right. So, well, first off, thank you so much, Barry. I felt this presentation was engaging and definitely one of the important ones. It's a lot of stuff, as you know, from my answers in the chat. I definitely learned something, and I think some of our other members did as well. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Pleasure was mine. Thank you all.
Thank you. And don't forget, anyone, if you're interested, on the screen you should see, if you're ever interested in sponsoring a meeting, please let us know. You do receive all of these benefits, and if you're interested, you can contact me at the Greater Cincinnati Safety Council email. So here's where that important announcement, I know a lot of us like to log off at this point, but I'm going to hold you here because I have a super exciting announcement for you. Next month on February 10th, we will be hosting the new BWC Administrator, Joe Locke, as our meeting. This will be the first time he's spoken to any safety council. And not only will he be speaking to our safety council, we will be opening up to all safety councils in the state. So we're super excited to do that. With that being said, the capacity will be held at 500 attendees. So when you get that email from me that I send out every month with the link and everything to register and the information about the meeting, that will be a pre-registration. It will only go to our safety council for about the first few days. Once those couple days are over and the dates will be in there, we will be sending that to the BWC and they will be sending it out to the other safety councils in the region and in the state. So you'll definitely want to make sure you're signing up early because it will be first come, first serve, 500 spots. And with this being the first time he's spoken, we are expecting a larger attendance. One other thing that will be open just to our members, if you have questions or topics that you would like us to share with the new administrator and his assistant prior to, I will be collecting those until next Wednesday. That will be the deadline. And a disclaimer, just because you submit a question or a topic, these are just suggestions, not necessarily going to be answered, not necessarily going to be addressed, but will be considered. So we hope to all see you there next week. It's going to be a really relevant topic, so I hope to see you all there. Again, thank you so much, Barry. Today was very helpful. We will have this posted on our website with Barry's slides, with all of his great information, his contact, and this video in the next couple days. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you next month.